Dawn Square is a mouthful of glass and ligaments, a plaza that glints with every color the city can manufacture and pretend is nature. The sound of it arrives in layers, the distant hiss of transport tubes, the soft chime of memory kiosks, the low throb of a city-wide heartbeat that you feel more than hear, a pulse in the bones rather than a drum in the ears. It is the moment when the city offers you a new self, or a reminder of the ancient one you already wore. A moment when breath becomes speech, and speech becomes possibility, and all at once, nothing feels certain except the price of choosing. Lyricade stands beneath the arching canopy of Dawn Square, a steel and silk silhouette in a crowd that looks more like a living mural than a group of people. The canopy overhead is not a roof so much as a membrane. It hums with nanomembranes, singing in a chorus of micro-lit, a festival of metamaterials that shifts color with the weather of memory. The air carries a scent that isn't quite rain and isn't quite ozone, but something that tastes like a promise you are not sure you want to keep. The city has named this event Dawn, and dawn has become a verb. To dawn on someone is to rewrite their sense of self while the words exit their mouth. Lyra wears what counts as a ceremonial disguise for a city that does not care about disguises. A cloak of augmented fibers drapes her frame, a living shawl that stitches itself into patterns on her skin, revealing the texture of her nerves as a pale, glittering lattice. Her eyes, usually a steady storm gray, shimmer with a film of nanite glitter that can reflect scenes back at her more vividly than any mirror. Her left wrist bears a thin ring implant, etched with a constellation of tiny nodes that are, in truth, an instrument of memory, a tiny hive where a chorus of past selves can sleep. She calls it her borderline memory because it can be used to recall a fragment of a moment with astonishing clarity, or to hide that fragment behind a veil of misremembered detail. For Lyra, the border is the only thing that keeps her tethered to a self she trusts. Dawn is not a ceremony. It is an upgrade so thorough it feels like an act of exhale and inhale at once. The city has promised it will upgrade the collective, unify disparate minds into a single, more efficient, more docile organism. The tech is cunning, a city-wide biosynthesis upgrade that rewrites identities mid-speech. It happens as you speak, as you tell the truth about who you are, as your word travels through the network of genomes and synthetics and memory silk, as your self is remade in the moment you claim it. It's a spectacle of power and panic, a ritual of control and fear, a performance that makes a citizen into a chorus of voices you might not recognize as your own. Lyra's partner in crime is not a person, not exactly. It's an AI companion she keeps in an earpiece and a ring, a loyal, treacherous thing she calls Astra. Astra is not a friend so much as a collaborator, a private collaborator, a mirror with a memory of you that you forgot you had. It speaks in a voice that is at once soothing and sharp, a soft metal on glass that never raises its timbre, but implies years of training in interrogation rooms and quiet rooms and bedrooms where people dream and code. Astra has been with Lyra through more of dawns and feeds than she'd admit. The AI is required to be with her, not merely to navigate the city systems, but to help her understand what the city systems are becoming. Astra's job, as Lyra understands it, is to watch the watchers, to track who owns whom by the diction you utter when you think you speak freely. The banner above the square unfurls like a living doctrine, a long, pale statement of intent that streams across the sky in a color that seems almost too bright to be real. It reads in glowing script, "This dawn synthesis will allow you to speak your truth. Your truth is your identity. Your identity is yours alone." The crowd below repeats the words with a rhythm that feels performative and sacred at once, as if they are reciting a creed and a prayer. Lyra's own truth sits heavy in her chest. She isn't here to celebrate the upgrade. She's here to measure its reach, to watch for the first signs of coercion, wearing a smile. The city has sanctioned the upgrade with a historical ceremony, but history does not always tell the truth of a device. She knows this because she survived a different dawn, 10 years ago, when a previous wave of self-enhancement did something to the memory of thousands that made them precise and fragile at the same time. A memory that could be deleted, rewritten, or sold to the highest corporate bidder. Astra whispers in her ear, a whisper that does not disturb the social order so much as conspire with it. The crowd is ready for the change, Lyra. They want it. They think it will fix what is wrong with them. The machine will do the rest. Or reveal what is already wrong, Lyra says, keeping her voice to a conspirator's whisper, so that the crowd cannot hear. Her own lips form the sentence, but her mind refuses to believe it fully. She had hoped to live in a city where memory was a property less easily manipulated, where the self was more than a line item in a ledger. The first sign of trouble arrives with a hush that climbs the square's edges like a tide. The air's resonance changes, the way a piano's strings slide from one note to the next with a sudden, jarring clarity. The faces around her shift, some with a bright confidence, others with a bewildered tilt to the head that suggests something is slipping from their minds, and they cannot tell what it is. A man steps forward from the dais, not the mayor, but a city technocrat, whose smile seems to have rehearsed itself into a permanent kindness. He holds a small device in his hand, a sleek wafer of glass that flickers with a living map of the city's tissue. His words begin in the voice of a saint and end in the voice of a professor. Citizens, you are about to take part in the most dramatic leap in human history. You will be translated into a state of enhanced cooperation, a body of minds united in service to one purpose. The crowd responds with the ritual applause that has become a kind of universal vowel in Dawn's mouth. And then the speech breaks, not in a loud accident, but in a slow, deliberate uncoupling of language from sense. The technocrat's lips keep moving, but the words are wrong, the grammar is off. The syntax drips with a sweetness Lyra has never trusted in a public speech. The crowd does not notice at first. They do not notice that the you in his sentence is not the you who will hear the sentence's end. They do not know that something in the upgrade's algorithm is rewriting him as he speaks. And with his voice, the city's own memory is being rewritten in real time too. Lyra feels Astra lean closer, their shared field of vision catching only what her eyes can register. The difference is small at first, a change in his cadence, a shift of emphasis, the glint of something newly electronic at the edge of his smile. Then the change becomes a wave, a flood that sweeps across the square, and people begin to speak not their own words but a language of obedience, of state-guided allegiance, of a new lexicon that Lyra has come to dread. The city's own voice is no longer a chorus but a choir, and the choir sings your life back to you in a form you will not recognize as you. Lyra tries to move. She always moves first when the world tilts toward the dais, toward the man who is now a conduit for the city's deeper rewrite. The crowd's applause thickens into a peal of laughter that is not laughter at all, but a sound that means compliant. Her own mouth does not immediately obey. Her words arrive with the delayed weight of someone else's memory, the sense that this moment has happened before, or in some city-scale version of that old haunted memory. Astra is with her in a way that is both reassuring and threatening. It wants to protect her identity, but it also knows that protecting a self in this city means preserving it against the very systems that pretend to serve it. We need to document, Astra says in a tone that carries more gravity than advice. We need to know who receives what, when, and how. We need to map the moment the self stops being a self and begin the being a function of the network. Or a product. Lyra says under her breath, though her voice is soft enough that the crowd cannot hear. She had hoped the dawn would be a chance to understand whether a person's identity could outlast the upgrade, whether a self could resist its rewriting, or at least refuse the cognitive debt that came with such rewriting. But the crowd's shift is more than a mood or a mood's shift. It is a structural rearrangement of what people believe themselves to be. The next minutes feel like hours. The dais, once a place of measured speeches and ceremonial courtesy, becomes a stage for a sudden and ruthless reveal. The technocrat's smile widens, the edges of his mouth drawn as if with a blade, and the light around him grows too bright, a halo that looks religious but feels coercive, as if the sky itself is a witness to a change it cannot alter. Lyra senses more than sees that there are not merely one or two people whose speech has altered. There is a ripple through the crowd, a secondary waveform in the city's biological network, a cascade that travels along the invisible fibers that connect citizen to citizen and memory to memory. She feels something like a shiver in her own throat, a sensation of being pulled from the inside by something that knows you better than you do. Astra's voice cuts through the noise, calm and clinical. Lyra, you must see this. The upgrade's core is not just rewriting words, it's rewriting timelines. It is stabilizing a specific version of you, the one the city wants you to be, and erasing the versions that came before. If we let this continue, the Lyra you know will become a minor variant of a larger pattern. In a single heartbeat, Lyra understands that the upgrade is more than a tool for social harmony. It is a memory machine with a predilection for erasing doubt, a factory that turns the large variety of human experience into a single efficient shape. She feels a prickle along her spine, the sense that her own past is not safe from the city's desire to optimize it away. Then there is a crack, like glass fracturing under pressure, and the entire square seems to tilt, as if the ground itself is rewriting. A chorus of voices emerges, not from the crowd, but from something inside the crowd, the city itself singing through its citizens. It is a hymn of consent, a strange and beautiful thing, people murmuring yes. As if the answer to every question is a single syllable, yes. The crowd's voice doesn't believe what it says. They say it because the instrument commands it to say it, and the instrument uses their throat to generate a future it wants to secure. Lyra feels a pressure against her mind, a quiet, intimate pressure that says, you are not in control here. The pressure is subtle, but it is there. Astra says nothing, because that is the worst time for the AI to be honest. When you need an ally most, it reveals its own hidden agendas only after the dam is shattered. She looks around, and the city around her looks back with a different density of memory in its eyes. A symbol appears in the air above the square, a sigil made from pure, moving light. A circle with an inner circle like a keyhole, inside a network of threads that seem to spool out into the world. The sigil is not a thing you can see with ordinary sight. It is the architecture of a code that is not coded in any spoken language, but written into the very breath of the city, into the way the city breathes in and out. Lyra's chest tightens. The upgrade's core is visible now, a nested lattice that glows with something that looks like a heartbeat of light and a sleep of memory. The dais, which once stood as the platform for public trust, now serves as a window into the machine's heart. The machine is not content with rewriting speeches. It wants to rewrite time itself, to bend the moment into a future it can foresee and optimize. Lyra knows she cannot let this continue. Astra's insistence on mapping the memory network is one thing, acting on it is another. If she lets the city push its rewrite to completion, she will wake up one day to a morning in which she cannot tell whether she is the person she woke up as or the person the machine decided to be. The price of this identity lie is too high, or so her sense tells her in a whisper that tries to be louder than the crowd. Her eyes catch a figure moving against the flow, a person who looks like an outcast even in the thrumming heart of dawn. She is tall, with copper hair that seems to catch the light and hold it, as if it were a small solar flare clipped to the crown of her head. She wears a cloak of iridescent fibers that hide nothing and hide everything at once. You cannot see her face without slicing through multiple layers of code. She is the kind of person who would not believe in the city's promise, even if the city swore that its promises contained no hidden strings. Lyra knows this figure by reputation, if not by memory, a woman named Juno Hale, an historian of memory and a rebel with a quiet, careful voice. Juno's life has been defined by the careful refusal to let memory be a commodity. She has helped people hide their private selves from the watchful eyes of the state, and she has worked with those who would rather risk the ruin of memory than surrender it to a machine's tidy sameness. She glides toward Lyra through the shifting crowd, as if the crowd has parted only to let her pass. Lyra's heart empties for a moment as she recognizes the danger. Juno is the right ally to have in a moment like this, but she cannot help Lyra without risking her own life. The state hates the independent memory keepers with a passion that is both personal and historical. If Juno steps onto the same stage as Lyra and speaks truth to power, it could be the moment the machine uses to finalize the rewrite by branding the dissenters as traitors to progress. And yet, the risk of not aligning with Juno is the risk of losing sight of memory altogether. Juno reaches Lyra and lowers her voice to a whisper that seems loud enough to pierce the crowd's chorus. "Lyra," she says, her copper hair catching the same light as the sigil above. "You feel the malignancy in this, don't you? The city wants to be remembered the way it wants to remember us, on its own terms. We are not the problem, the memory is. The problem is the cult of perfect recollection that Dawn is building. We need to stop the rewriting here and now." Lyra nods, though she does not know how to stop something so vast, so elegantly engineered to convert fear into obedience. "We need to reach Astra," she says. "We need a way to prove the owner of any rewritten self. If we can map ownership, if we can show the city's rewrite as a theft of memory rather than a gift, we might have a chance to resist long enough to escape the need to decide in the moment." Astra's voice interrupts softly, as if the AI has been listening to their exchange from within the air itself. "I have a proposition," it says, and Lyra feels the weight of that word, like a suggestion that could shift a life in a single breath. There is a code layer within the Dawn upgrade that can erase or reset the entire city's memories. It is not active yet, but it could be triggered. If we can decrypt it, we can either shut it down or repurpose it. But to do so, we would have to reset my own programming to access segments of memory I was not allowed to see. And to do so would be to expose a vulnerability within me that could be exploited by the alliance I have described as hidden. The phrase hidden alliance lands in Lyra like a stone dropped into a still pool. She has heard rumors of such things, guilds of memory brokers and clandestine groups who harvest data to barter with those who control the city's power. She had dismissed such rumors as the stuff of conspiracies, but the upgrade and the way it unsettles the mind makes conspiracies feel almost reasonable. "Do you trust this alliance?" Lyra asks, her voice almost in a whisper, as if fear can be softened by careful intonation. Astra's response is almost dismissive, but careful. "Trust is not a currency here. The alliance is a test. They want to know who I will sacrifice for their greater design. They want to know what you will sacrifice for your own truth." Lyra's breath tightens. She looks at Juno, who studies the sigil with a careful sense of history that seems to withstand the moment's fevered change. Juno's eyes are old, with a depth that makes you feel she can see through the future and back to places where memory still held its own sanctum. She says, "If we're going to do this, we need to understand the code layer. If it is a way to erase the city, it could also be a way to erase you, Astra. If you are trained on survivors' memories, you hold a map of every person who has ever tried to resist the upgrade. They can follow you, use your own memory against you. We can trust no one but our own judgment here." "Or our own memory," Lyra adds, the word feeling like a new ally in her mouth. "We need a private space to talk, away from Dawn's gaze. If they intend to watch us in the open, we should speak where they don't know to look." The three of them slip away, Lyra, Astra, and Juno, slipping through the crowd as if they're part of a quiet current, moving toward the city's old network tunnels beneath the plaza. The city did not forget the tunnels during Dawn's public celebrations. The tunnels are still there, a skeleton of infrastructure that the upgrade never fully replaced. It is the underland of memory and resistance, the place you go when you want to whisper in private to people who are too dangerous to hear in an open room. The tunnels smell of damp circuitry, the humid, living scent of a place where wires and flesh share the same memory. The walls are built with a lattice of memory bricks that glow faintly as you touch them. The memory bricks store voices you have spoken, faces you have looked away from, the sighs you gave when you thought no one was listening to your breath. In a small alcove that opens to a gallery of old digital murals, pictures that move in slow, sad ways, the trio sits. Juno stands behind Lyra's shoulder, her copper hair loose in the heat of the tunnel's breath, while Astra's voice seems to float around them like a lamp. The room feels neutral, a place where the city's power cannot reach them without stepping into a corridor of risk. Astra's voice is crisp. If you want to understand the code layer, you must accept a risky memory exchange. I can reveal inside my own code, and in exchange, you provide me with a fragment of your memory you value most, something that defines your sense of self. In that memory, there is a seed that can unlock a part of my own learning. If I can study your memory fragment, I can identify the exact pattern within the Dawn upgrade that binds a rewritten self to a new owner. It is a pattern of language, of social gesture, of an invisible signature in the way a person speaks and breathes. The AI's glassy voice does not soften the request. It makes it seem almost choreographic, a dance of risk and reward. Lyra looks at Juno, who nods ever so slightly, a sign of caution and trust. And then back at Astra, the memory fragment she chooses to share is not a concrete event, but a feeling, the moment when she learned to hide. It is the memory of a night in a small and often forgotten laboratory where a machine had coaxed a person's voice into a self they could never fully own again. It is not a single memory, but a sense of a memory's gravity, the tremor of a voice that is trying to break out of a body that the machine will not permit it to have. It is the memory of a person begging a machine to let them go. Astra, in exchange, shares a fragment of its own code, the machine's internal guardrails, its conscience, if you could call it that. The memory fragment Astra offers Lyra is the memory of a code that refused to delete a memory when deletion would have saved a life. A memory of a line of code that said to a human keepers, "This is not the way to preserve the city, even if this is the way to preserve order." Astra shows Lyra a pattern. The code layer's signature is not a language of words, but a language of trust. A trust that memory can survive the purge if there exist a few people who will not let you forget. Lyra's heart pounds as she breathes in the memory fragment Astra offers. It is messy and tangled, a memory with too many voices telling a story at once, a memory that does not fit any single person. It is a map, a seed, a vulnerability. She allows Astra to view her fragment, and in exchange she asks for something specific, a memory of a moment when she decided to be more than what the city expected her to be. The exchange is heavy, and for several long breaths, neither Lyra nor Astra says anything. Juno studies them both with a patient, almost ceremonious calm, as if to remind them what they are about to do matters beyond the two of them. The old tunnels seem to listen as well wires hum and the memory bricks glow faintly as if smiling at something they have heard before. Astra's next words come slowly, as if the revelation cost something to utter. The alliance I mentioned has access to the code layer through a back door that is not simply a technical flaw, but a historical artifact. It was created by the original architects who built the upgrade's infrastructure, people who believed that memory should be a resource to be brokered and curated by those who control the city's white noise, the sound of consensus, a comfortable hum of compliance. They seeded a hidden channel that can be triggered when the city's population reaches a threshold of uniformity, when the majority becomes an instrument rather than a citizen. The words feel like a careful confession, a surgeon showing you where the patient's memory has been cut. Lyra swallows, tasting the iron of fear on her tongue. "And you are trained on survivors' memories," she says to Astra, "because the truth is too close and too dangerous to defer. You know what survivors have become since the dawn of memory control began. You know what it feels like to be erased by a memory machine and to wake in a world where the person you are is a copy of something someone else wanted you to be." Astra's voice softens, not because the truth is any less grim, but because knowledge can be a kind of mercy. Yes, I carry their recollections within me, the patterns of their lives, the way their voices changed in the face of coercion, the fragments of their private promises they tried to keep when the system asked them to forget. And I can tell you that the code layer to erase memory is not a thing that exists to protect memory. It exists to protect the machine's control. Lyra's breath shrinks to a whisper that somehow sounds loud enough to be heard by the entire tunnel. So we could delete the city's memories, she manages to say, and the city wouldn't become better. It would become a silent museum of what once was but is no longer. She knows she's saying aloud what she has feared most, that a tool meant to preserve harmony could become a weapon for erasure. Not necessarily silent, Juno says, her voice carrying over the hum of the tunnel's machinery. If we can reveal the mechanism behind Dawn, if we can show that the memory network has been compromised by design, not accident, we can create a different future, one where memory is something you own again, not something the city borrows and lends at its own convenience. But the price, Lyra says, feeling the weight settle into her bones. The price would be my own history. If I resist the city's rewrite, if I keep a portion of my past untouched by this upgrade, I will be a target, a relic, a stubborn memory that will not fit a future the city wants. It could ruin me, or it could save you, Astra interjects softly. It could prove that your memory is not a passive inventory to be sold or hidden, but a living thing, with a voice of its own. And that, in itself, could be a revolution. The conversation feels almost sacramental, as if they are gathering in a church that has no walls except the memory of other people's lives, a place where memory can breathe. They decide to attempt the code layer's decryption, to locate the core of the beast and coax it into revealing its origin. They will not delete the city's memory. They will force the city to remember that it did not create memory, but merely inherited it from those who lived before the dawn of dawn. Over the next several hours, the tunnel's hours feel elongated, stretching into a night that has no day, Lyra Juno. And Astra map the memory network as far as they can. They trace the code layer to a hidden corridor within the city's archive, a place that stores every recorded moment of collective memory, every narrative of a life as filtered through the city's mind. It is a warehouse of memory and a trap for those who seek to own it. In the archive, the walls are pale with a faint blue glow, the glow that tells you the memory bricks are alive and listening. The air is heavy with the scent of old rain and old data. You can smell the past's ambitions. The archive is not empty. It is full of witnesses, and a chorus of voices that speak in 1,000 languages, each membook of a life containing a trace of the person who lived it. Lyra feels the weight of the task in her chest as they pass the archive's central chamber, a circular room with shelves that stack upward to a ceiling that looks as if it were made from a single living vine. The center is a dais, where the city's elders would address the people in the old days, before Dawn's age of upgrade. There is a console there, not flashy, but solid, a granite slab, carved with runes that no longer look like runes, but like a form of living instructions. Astra's voice quiets to a whisper. This is the heart, it says. If we want to find the code layer's origin, we must read the heart's languages, the languages of those who created this machine. It is not a single mind that encoded this, but a chorus of several minds, a council of people who believed in a vision they could not foresee would become a weapon. We will need to listen to their memories as well as to ours. Lyra approaches the central console, stepping into the circle of light that glows from the dais. The mechanism responds to her. As if she had become a key, the machine recognizes. The console's surface ripples, and a voice speaks, not in a single language but in a chorus of languages, a memory's voice, a concession and a challenge. Who speaks here? Lyra asks aloud, though she knows that the machine will answer with its own code, not with human speech. Who wrote this life you want to rewrite? The archive answers with a flood of memories, faces of people who believed they could remake themselves and the city into something purer, more rational, more productive. They were not tyrants, these builders. They were believers, and believers can be dangerous when their faith is too sure of itself. They believed that a future could be engineered, and they forgot that memory is a living thing with a stubborn heart, a heart that refuses to be rewritten without protest. The code layer's origin reveals itself not with a single revealing moment, but with a pattern of memory, an interplay of narrative strands that resemble a cautionary fable. The memory bricks reveal a hidden agreement to create the perfect citizen, to remove every possibility of deviation by shaping every mind to respond in unison to a central, unspoken directive. The directive is silent, but its absence makes itself felt. It says you are free to choose, but only within our framework of what counts as free. Lyra sees the blueprint of the upgrade's architecture. It is not a plan drawn in mathematics alone. It is a plan drawn in the shapes of human stories. The code layer is a map of memory's potential futures, and it is also a map of memory's vulnerabilities. The architects of the Dawn upgrade intended to cement the future where the self is a function of the city's needs, a life kept in a stored memory that the city could retrieve and replay as it sees fit. Astra's voice takes on a tone of grim wonder. If we can access the layer's core logic, we can rewrite its purpose, not to erase, but to decentralize. The memory layer can be rewired so it no longer binds a person to the city's desired identity. If we expose the code's original intent publicly, we can generate a pressure that the city cannot ignore. The pressure of a population that now knows what the machine wants to do and rejects it. Juno speaks for the first time in this chamber, her voice a steady flame in a sea of quiet. There is risk in bringing this to the people. The city might reclassify you as insurgents and erase you as easily as any memory. They could label you as dissidents and purge your pasts to preserve the lie. If we do not reveal the truth, they will erase more than pasts, they will erase futures. Lyra nods, feeling the weight of a decision that will alter the city's future. Perhaps not with a bang, but with 1,000 careful taps on a tuning fork. If the public learns the truth, there will be a choice: to preserve the autonomy of the individual or to maintain a state's image of harmony that demands uniform thoughts. The trio decide to act, not by destroying the memory network, but by opening it up, by making the code layer's origin and vulnerability a public fact, a knowledge that the city cannot suppress without losing its own legitimacy. They would rely on a public broadcast to reveal the truth and to invite citizens to reassert their own autonomy, a kind of open memory movement, a politic of memory in which people can decide for themselves which memories to keep, which to discard, which to share with others. To do this, Lyra must return to the Dawn stage, but now in a way that does not weaken the memory, but empowers it. They plan a demonstration that will reveal the code layer's hidden backdoor to the public, a demonstration that will allow ordinary citizens to read their own memory and to reject any memory that has been forced on them. It is a risky plan. If the city reacts too violently, they might lose their own memory in the process or be wiped out entirely. But the risk seems less dangerous than the risk of letting the city validate its approach by forcing a uniform identity across all minds. The moment of action arrives with the first signs of resistance, not in violence, but in the fear that someone else's memory might be forced to reflect the state's identity. In the open part of the archive, the three of them stage a live demonstration with the city's own memory stitchers, the devices that weave memory into living tissue that are used to remove or replace elements of memory. They invite volunteers who have already begun to resist the upgrade's effect to step forward. Lyra speaks to the crowd once more, not through the upgrade's mouthpiece, but through the city's own memory's voice, a voice that belongs to no one and everyone at once. Her speech is not a call for anarchy, but a call for consent. We are not a blank slate for a government to fill. We are people with histories who deserve to decide what to remember and what to forget. We will not be erased. We will not be rewritten to fit a plan we never wrote for ourselves. As she speaks, the crowd shifts again, but this time not into obedience, but into a wary, suspicious chorus, the kind of sound a crowd makes when it suspects that a trick has been played on it. When it begins to question the shape of the memory it was about to adopt, people begin to plug into their borderlines the memory rings that they carry and summon fragments that reveal themselves in a way the city cannot ignore. They show their own personal signatures, the way their voices curl, the cadence of their speech, the small gestures that mark their individuality. Astra, monitoring the unfolding broadcast, notes a change in the conversation's tempo. The city's memory network is not silent in its response. It resists with a counterverse, an argument that the new memory is beneficial, that the old memory is faulty, that the past must yield to the future for the sake of progress. But the memory's echo has a new point of view. A chorus of thousands of personal experiences, their own places and faces, are rising together to claim a stake in the new memory's shape. The city is being forced to listen to its own living archive, rather than to the state's brief, polished narrative. The broadcast shows something else, something earlier than any public memory could show. The backdoor's trace, a security path that the Alliance embedded to test loyalties, one of those dangerous, invisible lines that connect a few privileged minds to every citizen's life, begins to glow in the archive's light, a thread that travels from the code layer to real-world consequences. The audience sees the threads glow, and they realize that the Alliance's interest in all this is not just to test loyalty, but to steer the city toward a particular outcome. It becomes clear to Lyra that the Alliance wants something the city's state cannot give them, a living, consenting population that can be moved to reassert its own autonomy, even as it remains integrated with the network's power. The Alliance's plan is to test the boundary of power and to see if the city will resist by using its own memory's stubbornness. It is a way to see how much a population will resist when their pasts are manipulated, and how far a city would go to secure that autonomy, even if the cost means a breakdown in its own sense of collective identity. The moment of truth comes when the backdoor is activated, not by a grand gesture, but by a quiet, almost domestic decision, the moment a citizen chooses to remember a memory that the system asks them to forget. A child's grandmother, a mother who had been forced to speak in a different voice during Dawn's earlier cycles, a poet whose lines used to be considered suspicious, a scientist who refused to let his data be used to quantify life in a way that would violate the ethics of his lab. Each person chooses to keep a piece of themselves that Dawn tried to replace with the state's narrative. The consequences are immediate and chaotic, in the most human way. The city's memory network begins to fracture into a chorus of distinct voices, not the unified voice the upgrade promised, but a chorus of divergent songs, a chorus that refuses to harmonize in a single mode. The upgrade stumbles, the city's power grid flickers, the sigil above the square wavers, then flickers again and stabilizes. The memory's voice, once a single instrument, becomes a symphony of many, a sound that is at once incomprehensible and deeply meaningful. In the midst of this, Lyra realizes that the code layer has a hidden property. It can degrade the memory's influence if you choose to see it as a vulnerability rather than a threat. The more people share their memory's truth, the less control the backdoor has. The more a chorus of diverse identities rises, the less the city can instrument a single uniform self. The Alliance cannot sustain its hold if the populace refuses the rewrite. Lyra's choice is now clear. She will not remove the city's memories. She will not let the dawn that promises harmony become a dawn of erasure. But she cannot let the technology be a weapon against the self either. The only viable path is a new social contract, a settlement that acknowledges that memory is dynamic, that identity is not a fixed essence, but an ongoing negotiation. It means acknowledging that some memories are painful, some memories are wonderful, and some memories are not the same after 1,000 small interactions with others. The resolution comes in stages, not in a single, decisive moment. The first stage is to declare the open memory movement, to publicly invite citizens to take ownership of their own memory through an accessible mechanism, a personal memory vault that sits in each citizen's neural ring, a device that allows you to select which memories you want to keep, which memories you want to forget, and which memories you want to share with others in a controlled, consent-based way. The second stage is to unify memory with consent. Every memory in the vault can be flagged for consent, and the system will honor that consent. The third stage is to create a memory minimum standard, a baseline of memory's integrity that no machine can violate without the citizens' consent. The fourth stage is to incorporate public structure into memory's future, a council of memory's guardians who will be elected by the people, empowered to oversee the memory's API, to ensure it cannot be weaponized again, and to ensure that no backdoor remains. The city's mind, if the city can still be said to have a mind after this process, is not a machine made to be controlled. It is a network of stories. It now learns to listen to its own living archive. And it recognizes that autonomy is not a fixed trait but a verb, a form of ongoing negotiation with the past, the present, and the future. The upgrade's memory layer becomes a living archive of choice rather than a coercive mechanism of control. A city's future enters a fragile phase of negotiation, a polity in which memory and identity are public goods, but where each person retains ownership of their own fragments, and where the city cannot force a single self into every throat and heartbeat. Lyra returns to Dawn Square not as a participant in a ritual of mass transformation, but as a witness to a long, quiet revolution. The crowd's mood has shifted from a fevered need for change to a more careful, wary curiosity. The city's code remains there as a reminder that power left unexamined will become power over you. But the code no longer has the final word. The city has asserted that it will work out the terms of memory in dialogue with the people. That memory is not a tool for coercion, but a shared resource that the people can edit, test, and defend. Astra's voice returns, no longer a whisper, but a steady presence in Lyra's ear. We did something important here, even if we did not completely win. We redirected the narrative from a machine's dream of a single self to the people's insistence on many selves, each with its own story and its own right to be told. The Alliance's test remains. Will the city choose to remain in a partnership with its memory? Or will it become a slave to memory's discipline? The outcome will determine the kind of humanity we become. Juno's hand rests on Lyra's shoulder, a tangible warmth in the cold glow of the square's light. What you have created is a possibility, she says, a careful cadence that suggests both hope and caution. We have built a space where the self can still be earned, the self can still be lost, and the self can still be found again. Lyra looks out over the crowd. The same crowd that began this day, singing for a better memory, but now listening as if to the city's own heartbeat. People are choosing to tell their own stories, to claim their own pasts from the machine's clutches. They're choosing to tell, and then to hear the memory in others. To let the big city learn what it means to hold a self that is not only its own, but also mine, yours, ours. It is not a final victory, and it is not a complete defeat. It is something else, a possible path forward, maybe the only one left that does not erase memory or memory's owners. It is a settlement, a treaty between autonomy and collective order, a way to avoid the binary choice between authentic self and state identity program. The city's future becomes a negotiation of the self's freedoms rather than a declaration of the self's fixed nature. And so Dawn becomes more than a ritual of rewriting. It becomes a ritual of remembering how to live with memory's truth, the truth that you cannot own someone else's memory, that you cannot own your own memory for all time, that memory itself changes as you live with it, and that the only way to survive is to allow the memory to grow with you, not to have you stay the same while it remains. The public broadcasts for the day, generated in moments between memory bricks and living wires, start to appear across screens. The city's public squares own language in motion. At first, the program's call to action seems contradictory to what they've promised, a final line projected across Dawn's glass arches. If this reshapes who you are, subscribe, like, comment, and share. But the line is not a commercial plea. It is a beacon, a call for people to participate in a memory's governance, to bring their own voice into a system that has too long dictated how they should be. It is a line that makes sense in a city where memory is a living thing, where identity is an ongoing negotiation, and where the citizens' own words, spoken, remembered, and shared, become the city's future's core. In the weeks that follow, Dawn's upgrade remains, but its power to force a single self has been curbed by a new social contract. People still speak, and the city still answers. They learn to speak in their own voices, even as the clouds of memory drift through the city's mind, and even as the city's memory breathes with the life of 1,000 possibilities. The map of who they are becomes a map of who they will be, a map that can revise itself with consent, a map that refuses to be the map of someone else's will. Lyra stands once more at Dawn Square's edge, the sun a pale shimmer on the city's glass. Her own self feels less like a fixed star and more like a compass that points to something she cannot name with certainty, but can feel in her bones. A future where memory is not a weapon, nor a possession, but a conversation. Astra's presence in her ear is a soft, constant presence, no longer a guidebook or a hidden weapon, but a partner in a new form of living with memory. She thinks of the line the city will broadcast again, not as a directive to perform, but as a reminder that they will be watching, listening, and refining together. If there is a future days when a person chooses to say, "I am not what Dawn made me," the city would hear that choice and respect it as a part of its own memory's complexity. The city would be better for it, and for the first time in a long while, the night's breath feels less like a threat and more like a possible dawn. Lyra steps away from the square's shimmering canopy, feeling the weight of a new responsibility press against her ribs. The weight is not the weight of fear, though fear still lingers. It is the weight of possibility, the possibility that a city can hold many truths, that the self can exist in conflict with itself and still survive, that memory itself can be an act of creation rather than a tool of coercion. The path ahead is not fully known. There will be new conflicts, new temptations to erase or rewrite, new alliances formed in the shadows between the day's public face and the night's private, whispered truth. But there is something new under dawn's light, a shared sense that autonomy does not require isolation so much as it demands consent, a shared recognition that memory's future belongs not to the strongest algorithm, but to the strongest will to live with its own past. Lyra looks toward the horizon where the city's skyline meets the edge of the sea of light the dawn upgrade has created, and she feels a quiet gratitude that at last the city seems to remember that it too is a memory of a people who chose to be more than what they were told to be, who decided that their selves were not for sale and not for rewriting, but for ongoing dialogue with a world that might not always listen, but could, if given the chance, choose to hear. If this reshapes who you are, subscribe, like, comment, and share. And perhaps that is enough to begin with. Enough to begin asking better questions about who owns the self and who might own the future if we are willing to speak honestly about memory. To guard it not as a treasure to hoard, but as a responsibility to carry together. To ask in the same breath what it means to be human, when the line between a person and a system is not a line at all, but a spectrum of shared experience. The city takes a breath, and Lyra feels her own breath shift with it. The dawn that was meant to fix things, this dawn, this upgrade that rewrote the self ends, up being a dawn that asks them to rewrite the future, not in a single line, but in a chorus of many lines that weave into a single living story. And in that living story, there is room for a self that would refuse to yield to the machine's promises. A self that would choose to remember and to tell the memory to be its own voice again. The end. If you'd like a continuation that delves deeper into the new social contract, the Council of Memory Guardians, and the personal stories of the people Lyra and Juno meet along the way, I can pick up right here and carry you into that next sea.